Have you ever stopped to consider how a few simple strokes of a pen, a few carefully chosen words inscribed upon a sheet of paper, can possess the power to reshape the very fabric of our world? It is a remarkable phenomenon. Throughout the long, sprawling narrative of human history, a story of conflict and cooperation, of ambition and survival, these signed documents stand as monumental turning points. They are the invisible architecture of our modern existence, the silent arbiters of borders, the unseen guardians of peace, and the blueprints for our collective future. These are not merely historical footnotes, they are the very scaffolding upon which our global society has been built, layer by painstaking layer. From the grand halls where exhausted diplomats finally lay down their arms, not with swords but with quills, to the hushed chambers where nations now gather to confront the shared threats of our time, these agreements have charted the course of human destiny. They have ended devastating wars that consumed generations, and they have ignited new alliances that span oceans. They have established the rules by which we trade, the principles by which we interact, and the very idea of what it means to be a sovereign nation. Each treaty, each accord, is a testament to our species' enduring and often desperate attempt to impose order on chaos, to find common ground amidst profound division, and to survive. Here, on this journey, we will explore these pivotal moments. We will travel back in time to witness the birth of the nation-state from the ashes of religious war. We will see the rise and fall of empires not just on the battlefield, but at the negotiating table. We will observe how humanity has grappled with the most profound challenges it has ever faced, from the existential threat of nuclear annihilation to the slow, creeping crisis of a warming planet. These are the stories of how we, as a global community, have tried, sometimes successfully, sometimes not, to navigate the complex currents of history together. So welcome to Curious Sagacity. I invite you to join us as we delve into this extraordinary collection of 20 international agreements that have fundamentally altered the world order, often in ways that are still felt every single day. We will uncover the intricate negotiations, the powerful personalities, and the lasting legacies of these documents that, with just the power of ink and promise, have forever changed how we live, how we trade, and how we coexist on this remarkable planet. Our story begins not with a bang, but with a signature in the heart of a war-torn continent. Our planet, in the mid-17th century, was a tapestry woven with threads of dynastic ambition and fervent religious conviction. In the heart of Europe, a conflict of unimaginable brutality had raged for 3 decades. The 30 Years' War was not a single coherent struggle, but a nightmarish vortex of interlocking conflicts, drawing in nearly every major power on the continent. It was a war that blurred the lines between soldier and civilian, where famine and disease became weapons as deadly as any cannon. The land itself seemed to groan under the weight of perpetual violence, its populations decimated, its economies shattered, and its social fabric torn asunder. It was a crisis of existence, a seemingly endless cycle of retribution and bloodshed. Against this bleak backdrop of devastation, a new idea began to germinate, born of sheer exhaustion and the desperate need for a different way. For 5 long years, in the Westphalian cities of Munster and Osnabrück, envoys and diplomats engaged in an unprecedented diplomatic marathon. The negotiations were painstakingly slow, a complex dance of competing interests, ancient grievances, and emerging political philosophies. Here, for the first time on such a scale, was an attempt not merely to end a war, but to fundamentally redesign the very principles of international relations. The air was thick with the weight of history, and the scent of a new world struggling to be born from the embers of the old. And so, in the year 1648, the Peace of Westphalia was concluded. It was not one treaty, but a pair of them, a complex web of clauses and articles that brought the calamitous war to its long-awaited end, but its true significance lay buried deeper within its text. It was a revolutionary document that subtly but profoundly shifted the foundations of power. It championed a radical new concept: sovereignty. The treaty established the principle that each prince, each ruler, would have the exclusive right to govern their own lands and determine their state's religion, free from external interference, particularly from the Holy Roman Emperor or the Pope. This was the moment the modern nation-state was conceived. This principle of national sovereignty became the bedrock of our modern international system. Before Westphalia, the world was a mosaic of overlapping authorities. Empires, dynasties, and religious institutions all vied for loyalty and control. After Westphalia, the blueprint for a world of distinct, independent, and equal states was laid out. International law as we know it has its roots in this very moment. It was the first critical step towards a global order where nations, at least in theory, interact as sovereign equals. The treaty did not create lasting peace, but it did create the framework within which future conflicts and cooperations would be managed for centuries to come. A century after Westphalia, the world had become an even larger stage for the ambitions of European powers. Their rivalries were no longer confined to the continent. They were projected across vast oceans, playing out in the dense forests of North America, the lucrative trading posts of India, and the contested islands of the Caribbean. The 7 Years' War, a conflict some historians consider the first true world war, was the ultimate expression of this global competition. It was a titanic struggle, primarily between Great Britain and France, for nothing less than global preeminence. The fate of continents, the control of vital trade routes, and the destiny of millions rested on the outcomes of battles fought thousands of miles from London or Paris. The conflict was a sprawling, multifaceted affair. In North America, it was known as the French and Indian War, a brutal contest for control of the continent's interior. In India, commercial trading companies, backed by their respective states, waged vicious campaigns to dominate the subcontinent's immense wealth. On the high seas, powerful navies clashed in decisive engagements that would determine who controlled the arteries of global commerce. For 7 long years, the world held its breath as these two great powers wrestled for dominance. When the fighting finally ceased, the geopolitical landscape of the planet had been irrevocably altered, and one victor stood clearly above the other. The culmination of this global struggle was the Treaty of Paris, signed in 1763. This was not a treaty of compromise. It was a treaty of victory, a document that codified a monumental transfer of power. France, humbled and defeated, was forced to cede the vast majority of its colonial possessions. Canada and all of its territories east of the Mississippi River were handed over to British control, fundamentally reshaping the future of North America. In India, French ambitions were permanently curtailed, paving the way for the eventual establishment of the British Raj. Britain's Royal Navy had secured dominance of the seas, ensuring its commercial and military supremacy for a century to come. The consequences of this single document were profound and far-reaching. The Treaty of Paris marked the definitive arrival of Great Britain as the world's foremost imperial power. The British Empire, upon which the sun would famously never set, truly began to take shape in the wake of this agreement. For France, the defeat was a source of national humiliation and financial ruin, a wound that would fester and contribute directly to the revolutionary fervor that would erupt just a few decades later. For the American colonies, the removal of the French threat and the imposition of new British taxes to pay for the war would plant the seeds of their own rebellion. The world we know today is, in countless ways, a direct descendant of the new order forged by this treaty. Here, in the heart of Europe, a new era is dawning. The old order, shattered by the ambitions of a single man, lies in ruins. The Napoleonic Wars, a relentless storm that swept across the continent for over a decade, have finally subsided. What remains is a landscape of uncertainty, a political ecosystem thrown into disarray. The great powers, the dominant species of this human world, now gather. They are drawn to Vienna not by instinct but by a shared, desperate need to restore balance. It is a monumental task, an attempt to tame the very forces of history and redraw the map of a world forever changed by conflict and revolution. The architects of this new world are the crowned heads and master diplomats of Europe, Austria, Prussia, Russia, and Great Britain, joined even by the vanquished, France. Their gathering is not merely a negotiation, it is a complex, intricate dance of power, prestige, and survival. Prince von Metternich of Austria, a cunning and conservative statesman, acts as the lead orchestrator, seeking to turn back the clock, to reinstate the old monarchies, and to suppress the dangerous new ideas of nationalism and liberalism that Napoleon's armies had unwittingly spread. The very air in the grand halls of Vienna is thick with intrigue, with whispered promises and veiled threats, as each nation jockeys for position in the post-Napoleonic food chain. The process is painstaking, a delicate construction of a new European habitat. Borders are erased and redrawn with the stroke of a pen, entire populations transferred from one ruler to another, like herds moved to new pastures. The German states are loosely gathered into a new German confederation, a buffer zone designed to contain future French aggression. The Kingdom of the Netherlands is created, another bulwark in the north. Poland is partitioned yet again, its territory divided amongst the victors. This is not a negotiation based on the will of the people, but a strategic re-engineering of the continent, a grand experiment in creating a lasting, if artificial, equilibrium to prevent another predator from rising to dominate all others. And so, a new system is born, the Concert of Europe. It is an alliance built on the principle of maintaining the balance of power, a pact to intervene collectively should any one nation threaten the peace. For nearly a century this delicate arrangement will hold, preventing a major continent-wide war. But beneath the surface of this imposed calm, the seeds of future conflict are sown. The forces of nationalism, though suppressed, are not extinguished. They lie dormant like seeds under winter snow, waiting for the right conditions to sprout and once again challenge the carefully constructed order of the old world, a testament to the fact that in the human ecosystem, stability is often just a temporary truce. A century of relative peace has been annihilated. The Great War has finally ended. The trenches fall silent. The world breathes a collective sigh of relief. But this is not the end, it is merely the beginning of a new, fraught chapter. The victors convene in the Hall of Mirrors at Versailles, the very same hall where the German Empire was proclaimed. Here they will attempt to construct a new peace, one they hope will last for all time. But the atmosphere is thick with grief, anger, and a thirst for retribution. France is determined to see Germany permanently weakened, its capacity to wage war utterly destroyed. Britain is wary of creating a power vacuum in Europe. The United States, led by Woodrow Wilson, arrives with a grand vision based on self-determination and collective security. These competing instincts create a deep and dangerous rift among the architects of the peace. The resulting treaty is a document of profound contradictions. It imposes punitive measures of staggering severity. The infamous War Guilt Clause forces Germany to accept sole responsibility. Its military is reduced, its heartland occupied, and it is saddled with crippling reparations. This is not a peace between equals. It is a verdict delivered by the victors, planting deep seeds of resentment within the German psyche, creating fertile ground for future extremism. Yet, within this punitive treaty lies a flicker of hope. This is the League of Nations, President Wilson's cherished dream. A global parliament where nations resolve disputes through diplomacy, the first attempt at permanent international cooperation, but its promise is fatally undermined from the start. The United States ultimately refuses to join. The League is born weakened, lacking the power and will to enforce its own principles, a noble aspiration built on treacherous foundations. The world has once again been plunged into darkness. The Second World War, a conflict that dwarfed even the horrors of the First, has laid waste to continents and claimed tens of millions of lives. The failure of the Treaty of Versailles and its League of Nations is absolute. The human species has demonstrated a capacity for self-destruction on an industrial scale. From the ashes of this global catastrophe, a new determination arises, a recognition that the old ways, the cycles of vengeance and retribution, have led only to ruin. A new approach is needed, a more robust, more inclusive, and more powerful instrument for preserving the peace. In the spring of 1945, even as the final battles of the war still raged, delegates from 50 nations gathered in San Francisco. They were not there to punish the defeated, but to build a future for all. They represented a vast diversity of cultures, political systems, and experiences, yet they were united by a common purpose: to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war. The memory of failure was their guide, the scale of the recent horror their motivation. They sought to learn from the weaknesses of the League of Nations, to create an organization with the teeth and the authority to make a genuine difference in the brutal arena of international relations. The document they crafted, the United Nations Charter, is a remarkable testament to this ambition. It begins with the profound and powerful words, "We the peoples," signaling a fundamental shift from a pact between governments to a commitment on behalf of all humanity. It lays out a vision for a world based on fundamental human rights, the dignity and worth of the human person, and the equal rights of men and women and of nations large and small. It is more than a treaty. It is a constitution for a new global community, a blueprint for a more cooperative and just world, born from the deepest despair. At the heart of this new organization is the Security Council, a body given the primary responsibility for maintaining international peace and security. Crucially, its 5 permanent members, the major Allied victors of the war, are granted the power of the veto. This was a pragmatic, if controversial, compromise designed to ensure that the world's most powerful nations would remain invested in the system. The United Nations was thus born, a complex and imperfect creation, yet it represented humanity's most ambitious attempt to date to govern its own worst instincts, a fragile shield against the ever-present threat of our own destructive nature, and a beacon of hope for a lasting peace. Here, in the seemingly tranquil setting of Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, a gathering of minds would profoundly reshape the very currents of global finance. It is 1944. The great conflict, the Second World War, is drawing to its inevitable, ruinous close. The old world lies in tatters, its economic foundations shattered by years of relentless destruction. The nations of the world, or at least those who would emerge victorious, understood that to avoid a repeat of the economic chaos that followed the First World War, a new, more stable system must be constructed. A system built not on rivalry, but on a carefully managed cooperation. The challenge was monumental. How to create stability from the ashes of global conflict. How to foster trade and reconstruction without returning to the destructive cycle of competitive devaluations and protectionist tariffs that had crippled the world economy in the 1930s. The architects of this new order, led by figures like John Maynard Keynes of Great Britain and Harry Dexter White of the United States, envisioned a world where economic interdependence was managed by powerful international institutions. Their plan was ambitious, seeking to tame the wild, unpredictable nature of international capital and establish a predictable framework for growth and prosperity. The solution that emerged was a system of fixed exchange rates, a delicate dance of currencies all pegged to the United States dollar. The dollar in turn was anchored to a solid, tangible foundation, gold, at a rate of $35 per ounce. This was the gold standard reborn, but in a modified, more flexible form. It created a predictable landscape for international trade and investment, a stable environment where nations could rebuild their shattered economies with a degree of certainty. This intricate web of financial connections was designed to ensure that the economic ecosystem, so recently ravaged, could begin the slow process of recovery and regrowth. To oversee this new world, 2 powerful new entities were brought into existence: the International Monetary Fund, or IMF, and the World Bank. The IMF was to act as the guardian of monetary stability, a lender of last resort to nations facing temporary balance of payments crises, preventing the catastrophic economic collapses that could spread like a contagion. The World Bank, meanwhile, was tasked with a longer-term vision, financing the reconstruction of war-torn Europe and later, promoting development in the poorer nations of the world. Together, they were the twin pillars of a new economic architecture designed to last for generations. A new kind of chill descends upon the post-war world. The fragile peace, so dearly bought, is threatened not by the open warfare of the recent past, but by a creeping ideological frost. An iron curtain, in the words of Winston Churchill, has fallen across the continent of Europe, dividing the world into 2 opposing territories. In the West, a collection of nations, exhausted but free, looked eastward with growing apprehension. The shadow of the Soviet Union, with its vast armies and its expansionist ambitions, loomed large, a formidable predator whose intentions remained dangerously unclear. Fear, a powerful evolutionary driver, began to shape a new kind of alliance. This was the genesis of the North Atlantic Treaty, signed in Washington, D.C. in 1949. It was not a treaty of conquest or territorial gain, but a pact of mutual survival. Its core, its very heart, is found in a single, powerful clause, Article 5. This article declared that an armed attack against one member nation would be considered an attack against them all. It was a profound statement of collective identity, a promise that the pact would defend any of its own. This principle of collective defense was a clear signal, a line drawn in the political landscape, intended to deter any potential aggression by promising an overwhelming, unified response. The creation of NATO fundamentally altered the geopolitical ecosystem. No longer did the nations of Western Europe and North America stand alone. They were now bound together in a formal military alliance, a superorganism with a shared nervous system. This alliance created a formidable bloc, a counterweight to the immense power consolidated under Soviet control in the East. The world was now starkly divided into two rival camps, each bristling with weaponry, each watching the other with a mixture of fear and suspicion. This was the dawn of the Cold War, a long, tense standoff between two titans, a struggle for dominance played out across the globe. For over 4 decades, NATO would be the central pillar of Western security. It was a shield, held firm against the perceived threat from the East. The alliance fostered unprecedented military cooperation, standardizing equipment and coordinating strategies among its members. It created a vast network of bases, command structures, and intelligence-sharing agreements, all designed to maintain a state of constant readiness. This long, watchful peace, maintained under the nuclear umbrella, was the defining feature of the latter half of the 20th century, a direct consequence of the pledge made in Washington on that spring day in 1949. Nature abhors a vacuum, and in the world of geopolitics, power is inevitably met with countervailing power. The formation of NATO in the West did not go unnoticed in the East. From the Kremlin, the Soviet Union observed this new Western alliance not as a defensive shield, but as an aggressive spear pointed directly at its heart and its sphere of influence. The response was predictable, almost a law of political physics. If the West was to band together in a military pact, then the East must do the same. A mirror image dark and formidable was about to be forged in the fires of ideological rivalry. And so, in 1955, 6 years after the birth of NATO, the leaders of the Soviet Union and its satellite states gathered in the Polish capital. It was here in Warsaw that the Treaty of Friendship, Cooperation and Mutual Assistance was signed, creating the alliance that would become known simply as the Warsaw Pact. On the surface, it was a pact of equals, a voluntary association of socialist nations committed to their common defense. It was presented as a direct and necessary response to the remilitarization of West Germany and its inclusion into the North Atlantic Alliance. In reality, however, the Warsaw Pact was an instrument of Soviet dominion. While NATO was an alliance of independent, if junior partners to the United States, the Warsaw Pact was overwhelmingly dominated by the sheer military and political might of the Soviet Union. The armies of Poland, East Germany, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, and Bulgaria were integrated into a command structure controlled from Moscow. It was less a pact of mutual assistance and more a mechanism for ensuring loyalty and maintaining a firm grip on the territories that formed a buffer zone between the USSR and the West. The creation of the Warsaw Pact cemented the division of the world. The Iron Curtain was no longer just a political metaphor, it was now a formal military boundary, a line separating two colossal, heavily armed blocs. For the next 35 years, Europe would exist in this state of suspended conflict. The two alliances, NATO and the Warsaw Pact, stood facing each other across a tense and fortified frontier. It was a world order defined by symmetry and opposition, a precarious balance of terror where the survival of humanity seemed to depend on the logic of mutually assured destruction, a logic born from these two rival treaties. Here, on a continent scarred by millennia of conflict, a remarkable evolutionary step was about to be taken. The mid-20th century saw Europe as a landscape of fractured territories, its peoples still reeling from the devastating tremors of two great wars. The instinct for self-preservation so often expressed through aggression and dominance was beginning to transform. A new survival strategy was emerging, one not of fortification and isolation, but of cooperation and shared destiny. This was a radical departure from the established order, a quiet revolution that began not with the clamor of arms, but with the scratching of pens on paper, a sound that would echo through the decades to come. This nascent superorganism, the European Economic Community, began its life with the Treaty of Rome in 1957. 6 founding members, France, West Germany, Italy, and the 3 Benelux nations, came together, like pioneering species venturing into a new, untested habitat. Their primary goal was economic, a common market where goods, services, capital, and labor could move as freely as shoals of fish in an open sea. This was more than just a trade agreement, it was a profound biological imperative, a recognition that their individual survival and prosperity were now inextricably linked. They sought to build a shared nest, a cooperative where the collective strength would far exceed the sum of its individual parts. The architects of this treaty understood the deep-seated territorial instincts that had driven their ancestors to war. They knew that to overcome these, they had to create a new environment, one where mutual benefit would override ancient rivalries. The treaty established institutions, the Commission, the Council, the Parliament, the Court of Justice, that would act as the neural network of this new entity, processing information and regulating the behavior of its members for the good of the whole. It was a grand experiment in political ecology, an attempt to engineer a stable ecosystem from the volatile elements of national sovereignty, a delicate and unprecedented balancing act. From these humble beginnings, the community would grow, adapting and evolving over time. New members would be drawn into its orbit, attracted by the stability and prosperity it offered. The initial focus on coal and steel, the very sinews of war, would expand to encompass agriculture, trade, and eventually, a single currency. The Treaty of Rome was the genetic code, the foundational blueprint from which the complex structure of the modern European Union would arise. It was a testament to the remarkable capacity of human societies to learn, to adapt, and to forge new paths towards a shared future, turning a continent of conflict into a landscape of cooperation. As humanity established new orders on its home planet, its gaze was simultaneously turning upwards, towards the vast, silent expanse of space. This was the ultimate wilderness, a realm of unimaginable scale and profound mystery. The technologies that had enabled conflict on Earth were now powerful enough to breach the atmosphere, carrying human ambition into the cosmos. But with this new capability came a new and terrifying peril. The rivalries of the Cold War, which had carved the Earth into opposing territories, threatened to extend into the heavens, turning the moon and the planets into strategic high grounds in a celestial power struggle. The final frontier risked becoming the next great battlefield. A moment of collective foresight was required, a recognition that this new environment demanded a different code of conduct. Thus, in 1967, at the height of the space race, the Outer Space Treaty was born. It was a document of extraordinary restraint and remarkable vision. Its core principle was simple yet profound. Space, including the moon and other celestial bodies, was to be the common province of all humankind. It could not be claimed by any single nation, no more than one could claim ownership of the wind or the tides. This was a declaration that the cosmos would not be carved up like the continents of old. The treaty explicitly forbade the most dangerous behaviors of the terrestrial world. Nations pledged not to place nuclear weapons or any other weapons of mass destruction in orbit, on the moon, or on any other celestial body. Military bases, installations, and fortifications were banned. The moon and other worlds were to be used exclusively for peaceful purposes. Astronauts, regardless of their national origin, were to be regarded as envoys of mankind, to be rendered all possible assistance in the event of accident or distress. It was an attempt to export humanity's highest ideals, rather than its darkest instincts, into the universe. And so a fragile peace was established in the Great Void. While superpowers competed for prestige, landing probes on distant worlds and footprints on the lunar dust, they did so within these agreed-upon rules of engagement. The treaty transformed space from a potential arena of war into a global commons, a vast laboratory for scientific discovery and peaceful exploration. It stands as a unique monument in the history of diplomacy, an agreement that looked beyond the immediate horizon of our world to preserve a realm that still fills us with a sense of wonder, a sanctuary for the future of all life. Back on Earth, a different kind of existential threat was taking root. Humanity had unlocked the fundamental power of the atom, and in doing so, had created a weapon of truly terrifying potential. The destructive force unleashed upon Hiroshima and Nagasaki had cast a long dark shadow across the globe. By the late 1960s, a handful of nations possessed these instruments of annihilation, and the world lived under the constant, unnerving threat of a nuclear winter. The danger was not just of war between the existing nuclear powers, but of a contagion, a rapid spread of this deadly technology to other nations across the planet. This was a unique challenge in the story of conflict. A single miscalculation, a single act of aggression, could trigger a chain reaction with consequences on a geological scale, potentially extinguishing complex life itself. In response to this shared vulnerability, the global community came together to forge the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, or NPT, which entered into force in 1970. It was a grand bargain, a complex and delicate ecosystem of promises designed to contain this man-made plague. The treaty was built upon three interdependent pillars, each essential for the stability of the whole structure. The first pillar was non-proliferation. The nations that did not yet possess nuclear weapons pledged not to acquire them, foregoing the ultimate symbol of military might for the sake of collective security. In return, the second pillar committed the 5 declared nuclear weapon states: the United States, the Soviet Union, the United Kingdom, France, and China, to pursue negotiations in good faith towards nuclear disarmament, with the ultimate goal of eliminating their arsenals entirely. It was a promise of a future free from the nuclear shadow, a horizon that, while distant, offered a powerful incentive for restraint in the present. The third pillar was a crucial element of the bargain: the right of all nations to access peaceful nuclear technology for energy, medicine, and research. This ensured that the treaty was not merely a tool of the powerful to deny technology to the less powerful, but a framework for safe, regulated cooperation. The International Atomic Energy Agency would act as the watchdog, the impartial observer, ensuring that peaceful programs were not diverted for military purposes. The NPT, though imperfect and constantly tested, has been remarkably successful. It has become the cornerstone of the global effort to prevent the spread of the deadliest weapon ever conceived, a vital shield against our own worst impulses. In the vast frozen landscape of the Cold War, 2 colossal power blocks stood in opposition, their ideologies as different as fire and ice. For decades, the air between them crackled with suspicion and the ever-present threat of annihilation. Communication was minimal, trust non-existent, the world held its breath, witnessing a standoff of unprecedented scale. Yet amidst this frigid geopolitical climate, a remarkable thaw began to take place. It was not a sudden melting but a slow, cautious process, a search for common ground in a world defined by its divisions. This delicate dance of diplomacy would culminate in an agreement that, for a moment, promised a different future. Here, in the Finnish capital of Helsinki, a city accustomed to navigating the complex currents between East and West, a new kind of summit convened in 1975. It was a gathering of immense ambition, bringing together the leaders of 35 nations, including the United States and the Soviet Union. Their goal was not to end the Cold War, for that was a task too monumental for a single meeting. Instead, they sought to manage it, to establish rules of engagement that could prevent the simmering conflict from boiling over into a catastrophic war. It was an attempt to build a bridge, however fragile, across the chasm of the Iron Curtain, a testament to humanity's instinct to seek stability even in the most hostile environments. The resulting document, the Helsinki Final Act, was a masterpiece of diplomatic compromise, a complex tapestry woven from 3 distinct threads, or baskets. The first basket was perhaps the most crucial from the Soviet perspective. It formally recognized the post-World War II borders of Europe. This acceptance of the existing territorial reality provided a sense of security and legitimacy to the Eastern Bloc, a long-sought prize. It was a declaration that the map of Europe, redrawn by the brutal realities of war, would now be respected, a foundation of stability upon which other agreements could be built. For the West, this was a significant concession, but one made in pursuit of a greater prize. The second and third baskets offered a counterbalance, a series of commitments that would prove to have far-reaching and unforeseen consequences. The second basket promoted economic, scientific, and technological cooperation, opening channels for trade and exchange that had long been sealed shut. But it was the third basket that contained the most potent seed of change, a commitment to respect human rights and fundamental freedoms, including freedom of thought, conscience, and belief. This inclusion, championed by the Western powers, introduced a new and powerful dynamic into the Cold War, transforming a struggle between states into a dialogue about the fundamental rights of individuals, a dialogue that would echo for decades to come. The Middle East, a cradle of ancient civilizations, has for centuries been a landscape of profound conflict. Here, territorial disputes are deeply entwined with history, faith, and identity. In the latter half of the 20th century, the conflict between Israel and its Arab neighbors had erupted into a series of devastating wars, leaving a legacy of bitterness and seemingly irreconcilable differences. The Sinai Peninsula, a vast and arid wilderness, became a symbol of this struggle, a battleground captured and recaptured. Any prospect of peace seemed as distant and unattainable as a mirage in the shimmering desert heat. It was a cycle of violence that many believed could never be broken. Yet, even in the most entrenched conflicts, the instinct for survival can compel sworn enemies to seek an alternative path. In 1977, a moment of astonishing political courage broke the deadlock. Egyptian President Anwar Sadat, leader of the most powerful Arab nation, undertook a journey that defied all expectations, flying to Jerusalem to address the Israeli Knesset. This singular act of diplomacy shattered decades of dogma and opened a narrow window of opportunity. It was a signal to the world and to a watchful American president that the impossible might just be achievable. The stage was set for one of the most intense and dramatic negotiations in modern history. The setting for this high-stakes endeavor was a secluded presidential retreat, nestled in the Catoctin Mountains of Maryland Camp David. Here, far from the glare of the world's media, U.S. President Jimmy Carter brought together two formidable and fiercely opposed leaders, Egypt's Anwar Sadat and Israel's Prime Minister Menachem Begin. For 13 days in September 1978, these three men engaged in a grueling test of will and diplomacy. The isolation was deliberate, forcing the protagonists to confront not just the issues, but each other, face to face. The negotiations were fraught with tension, collapsing on several occasions, only to be painstakingly revived by Carter's relentless determination. The outcome of this crucible of negotiation was the Camp David Accords, a pair of framework agreements that fundamentally altered the political landscape of the Middle East. The first outlined a process for Palestinian self-governance in the West Bank and Gaza, an ambition that would remain tragically unfulfilled. But it was the second framework that yielded a concrete and historic result, a formal peace treaty between Egypt and Israel. In exchange for full diplomatic recognition, Israel agreed to a phased withdrawal from the Sinai Peninsula, returning the entire territory to Egyptian sovereignty. It was the first time an Arab nation had made peace with the Jewish state, a courageous, controversial, and monumental step towards a different kind of future. The European continent, for so long a habitat defined by fierce competition and recurring, devastating conflict, had undergone a remarkable transformation. Following the great wars of the 20th century, a new survival strategy emerged: cooperation. The European Economic Community, born from the Treaty of Rome, had successfully bound the economic destinies of its members together, creating a common market and fostering unprecedented peace and prosperity. But as the Cold War drew to a close, a new, more ambitious evolutionary leap was contemplated. The question was no longer just about trade, it was about creating a truly unified political and economic entity. This new phase of integration was formalized in a small Dutch city that would lend its name to a monumental treaty, Maastricht. Here, in 1992, leaders of the European community gathered to sign the treaty that would officially establish the European Union. This was more than a simple name change, it represented a profound deepening of the European project. The treaty established a new structure, often visualized as a temple with three pillars. The first pillar encompassed the familiar economic community, but the second and third pillars ventured into new territory, a common foreign and security policy, and cooperation in justice and home affairs. The most audacious and tangible element was the plan for a single shared currency. The vision was to create an economic and monetary union, culminating in the introduction of the euro. This was a move of incredible ambition, requiring member states to cede a fundamental aspect of their national sovereignty, the power to print their own money, to a new central authority, the European Central Bank. To qualify, nations had to meet strict criteria regarding inflation, debt, and budget deficits, a rigorous test of economic discipline designed to ensure the stability of the new currency. It was a bold gamble on a shared economic future. The treaty was not without its controversies. It sparked intense debates across the continent about the nature of national identity and the fear of a centralized superstate. The path to ratification was fraught with difficulty, requiring referendums and narrow parliamentary votes. Yet its eventual adoption marked a point of no return. The Maastricht Treaty transformed a successful trading bloc into a powerful political union, creating a new global heavyweight. It laid the institutional and economic groundwork for the European Union we know today, a unique experiment in shared sovereignty and collective identity, forever changing the habitat of European nations. Here, on the vast North American continent, a new kind of ecosystem was engineered not by nature, but by human ambition. The year is 1994, and a monumental shift is underway, a redrawing of economic territories that would connect three distinct nations into a single colossal marketplace. The North American Free Trade Agreement, or NAFTA, was a pact of unprecedented scale, a bold experiment in continental cooperation. It promised to dissolve the economic borders between the United States, Canada, and Mexico, creating a seamless flow of goods, services, and capital. The architects of this treaty envisioned a vibrant, interconnected economic landscape, one where competition and collaboration would drive prosperity for all. This was a complex and often controversial undertaking. The treaty's primary mechanism was the systematic elimination of tariffs and other trade barriers that had long separated these neighboring economies. For centuries, these artificial dams had regulated the flow of commerce, but now, the floodgates were to be opened. The proponents argued this would unleash a torrent of economic activity, allowing each nation to specialize in what it did best, a principle known as comparative advantage. Industries, from the sprawling automotive factories of the American Midwest to the agricultural heartlands of Mexico, were now part of a single intricate food web, their fates more deeply intertwined than ever before. The effects rippled through every level of this new economic habitat. For consumers, it promised a greater variety of goods at lower prices, as products moved freely across the continent without the added cost of tariffs. For businesses, it opened up vast new territories to conquer, new populations to serve. A Canadian timber company could now sell its lumber to a construction firm in Texas with far fewer hurdles, while a Mexican electronics manufacturer could supply components to a Silicon Valley tech giant with newfound ease. This was economic evolution in action, a survival of the fittest where efficiency and innovation became the primary tools for success in this newly integrated domain. Yet, this grand experiment was not without its critics, who warned of the potential for disruption and imbalance. They feared that the removal of protective barriers would expose vulnerable industries and communities to relentless competition, leading to job losses in higher-wage countries as companies relocated to regions with lower labor costs. The debate raged, highlighting the inherent tension within this new system. Would this continental integration lead to a harmonious and mutually beneficial ecosystem, or would it create a fiercely competitive arena with clear winners and losers? The story of NAFTA, like any great drama in the natural world, is one of adaptation, struggle, and profound, lasting change. For millennia, the Earth's climate has operated in a delicate, self-regulating balance, a complex dance of atmospheric gases that sustains life as we know it. But in the late 20th century, humanity began to understand the profound impact of its own activities on this fragile system. The industrial age had unleashed vast quantities of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases, wrapping the planet in an invisible, warming blanket. In response to this growing crisis, the global community convened in the ancient Japanese city of Kyoto in 1997. Here, they would attempt something never done before, to forge a legally binding agreement to curb the emissions that threaten to alter the very climate of our world. The Kyoto Protocol was born from a stark realization that the planet's atmosphere is a shared resource, a global commons, and its protection is a collective responsibility. The treaty established a clear and ambitious goal, committing the world's developed nations, those historically responsible for the bulk of emissions, to specific legally enforceable reduction targets. It was a recognition that the planet's health was failing and that a coordinated intervention was urgently required. The protocol was not merely a statement of intent, it was a prescription, a detailed plan of action designed to slow the planet's rising fever before the symptoms became irreversible, a first step in a long and arduous healing process. The treaty introduced innovative mechanisms to achieve its goals, creating a new kind of global marketplace for carbon. It allowed for emissions trading, a system where a country that reduced its emissions below its target could sell its excess capacity to a nation struggling to meet its own commitment. This was an attempt to harness the power of market forces for environmental good, to put a price on pollution and create a financial incentive for an entire species to clean up its act. It was a complex and ingenious design, treating the Earth's atmosphere as a finite resource that must be managed with care, foresight, and economic ingenuity, a new frontier in global governance. However, the path of the Kyoto Protocol was fraught with difficulty. The very notion of placing limits on industrial activity, the engine of modern economies, was met with fierce resistance. The treaty's distinction between developed and developing nations became a major point of contention, with some powerful countries, most notably the United States, refusing to ratify the agreement, arguing it placed an unfair burden on their economies while exempting major emerging polluters. The protocol, therefore, represented both a monumental achievement in international environmental law and a stark illustration of the profound challenges involved in forging a unified response to a truly global threat. Throughout history, the darkest chapters of human behavior, genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity, have often gone unpunished, shielded by the very structures of power that enabled them. The concept of national sovereignty, while essential, could also serve as a fortress, protecting perpetrators. But at the close of the 20th century, a powerful idea took root: that certain crimes are so egregious they offend all of humanity, and that the international community has not just a right, but a duty to intervene. In 1998, in the historic city of Rome, this idea was given form and substance, creating a permanent institution to hold individuals accountable. The Rome Statute is the foundational treaty that established the International Criminal Court, or ICC. This was not a court for nations, but for individuals. A tribunal designed to prosecute the architects of atrocities, regardless of their official title or position. It represented a fundamental shift in international law, a declaration that no one, not even a head of state, is above the law. The court was conceived as a backstop, a tribunal of last resort, intended to act only when national courts are unable or unwilling, ensuring a new era of accountability. The jurisdiction of the ICC is carefully defined, focusing on 4 core international crimes: genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, and the crime of aggression. These are the acts that tear at the fabric of civilization, the systematic destruction of peoples, the widespread attacks on civilians, and the flagrant violation of the laws of armed conflict. The creation of the court sent a clear signal the world is watching, and the age of impunity is drawing to a close. It was a promise to the victims of unspeakable violence that justice, however elusive, was no longer an impossible dream. Yet the ICC's authority is not universally accepted. Several of the world's most powerful nations, including the United States, China, and Russia, have remained outside its jurisdiction. This has created a complex and challenging landscape for the court, limiting its reach and raising questions about justice. Despite these hurdles, the Rome Statute stands as a landmark achievement, a testament to humanity's enduring aspiration where justice can prevail over tyranny, and where the rule of law can protect the most vulnerable among us. Here, on the intricate stage of global diplomacy, we witness a most delicate and precarious dance. The year is 2015, and the human species, for decades, has lived under the shadow of a self-made threat: the atom, split and weaponized. The potential for proliferation casts a long, dark shadow across the arid landscapes of the Middle East. For years, a standoff has persisted, a complex ritual of sanctions, rhetoric, and clandestine development. The international community, a sprawling and often fractious superorganism, watches with bated breath as one nation, Iran, moves ever closer to mastering the nuclear cycle. The stakes are almost unimaginably high, a potential tipping point that could trigger a cascade of instability across an already volatile ecosystem. The challenge, therefore, is one of containment and trust, 2 commodities often in short supply in the human political sphere. How does one diffuse a potential conflict without resorting to open hostility, an act that could prove catastrophic for all involved? The answer, as is so often the case in nature, lies in a complex negotiation, a series of carefully choreographed interactions. The P5+1, a coalition of the world's major powers, the United States, the United Kingdom, France, China, Russia, and Germany, engage in this painstaking process. They seek to construct a habitat of agreement, a framework of rules that can bind and restrain the atomic ambitions, channeling them away from military use and towards peaceful, observable science. This remarkable diplomatic endeavor culminates in what is known as the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or JCPOA. It is not a simple truce, but a highly complex, multi-layered organism of a treaty. Its anatomy is built upon a fundamental exchange: the lifting of crippling economic sanctions in return for verifiable, long-term limits on Iran's nuclear program. It is a survival strategy for all parties. For Iran, it offers a path back into the global economic fold, a chance for its societal health to recover. For the world, it offers the precious resource of time and the even more valuable gift of transparency, a window into a once opaque program. The agreement itself is a testament to the human capacity for intricate, cooperative problem-solving, even amongst historic rivals. It establishes a rigorous inspection regime, allowing international observers unprecedented access, like scientists tagging a creature to track its movements and behavior. It mandates the redesign of nuclear facilities, altering their very structure to make the production of weapons-grade material a near impossibility. The stockpiles of enriched uranium, the vital nutrient for a nuclear weapon, are to be drastically reduced and shipped away. It is a profound attempt to tame one of the most powerful forces humanity has ever unleashed, using not weapons, but words, verification, and the fragile bonds of a negotiated peace. Here on this remarkable planet, a new kind of challenge has emerged. One not born of territorial ambition or ideological conflict, but from the very air we breathe and the climate that sustains all life. By the early 21st century, the evidence became undeniable. The intricate balance of our world's ecosystems was being profoundly altered by human activity. The warming of the oceans, the melting of ancient ice sheets, and the increasing frequency of extreme weather events were no longer distant predictions, but a present and escalating reality. A new kind of agreement was needed, one that could unite the entire global community in a shared struggle for survival, a pact not between nations, but for the planet itself. The stage was set in Paris in the year 2015. Representatives from nearly every nation on Earth gathered, a testament to the gravity of the situation. The negotiations were complex, a delicate dance of competing interests, economic realities, and historical responsibilities. Unlike previous attempts which had struggled to gain universal traction, the Paris Agreement was designed with a unique architecture of inclusivity. It did not impose rigid top-down targets, but instead invited each nation to determine its own contribution, its own path towards a collective goal. This approach, a system of nationally determined contributions, was a masterstroke of diplomacy, fostering a sense of ownership and shared purpose among the global family of nations. The central aim of the Paris Agreement is breathtaking in its ambition: to hold the increase in the global average temperature to well below 2 degrees Celsius, above pre-industrial levels, and to pursue efforts to limit the temperature increase even further to 1.5 degrees Celsius. This is not merely a number, it is a critical threshold for life on Earth. Crossing it could trigger irreversible tipping points, setting off a cascade of environmental changes that would threaten ecosystems and human civilizations alike. The agreement represents humanity's collective decision to pull back from the brink, to consciously steer our industrial and economic systems towards a more sustainable and harmonious existence with the natural world. The agreement also established a framework for transparency and accountability, creating a cycle of review and ambition. Every 5 years, nations are expected to come together and submit new, more ambitious climate action plans. This ratchet mechanism is designed to ensure that global efforts do not stagnate but continually strengthen over time, adapting to the latest scientific findings and technological advancements. It is a long-term strategy, a marathon rather than a sprint, acknowledging that the journey to a low-carbon future is a multi-generational endeavor. The Paris Agreement is, in essence, a promise made by the present generation to all those who will follow, a pledge to protect our shared home. For generations, the political landscape of the Middle East has been defined by deeply entrenched divisions, a complex mosaic of ancient grievances and modern conflicts. The relationship between Israel and many of its Arab neighbors has been one of the most enduring and seemingly intractable of these divisions, a source of instability that has reverberated across the globe. For decades, peace was often viewed through a single, narrow lens, contingent on resolving one core conflict before any other progress could be made. This long-standing paradigm created a diplomatic inertia, a stasis where new possibilities for cooperation struggled to find fertile ground, seemingly frozen in the amber of history. Then, in 2020, a remarkable shift occurred, a diplomatic realignment that few had predicted. The Abraham Accords, brokered with the assistance of the United States, heralded a new approach. The United Arab Emirates and Bahrain, followed later by Sudan and Morocco, took the unprecedented step of normalizing relations with Israel. This was not a peace treaty to end an active war, but rather an agreement to build a warm peace, one based on shared interests, economic cooperation, and people-to-people connections. It represented a fundamental reordering of regional priorities, moving beyond old animosities to embrace a future built on mutual prosperity and security. The Accords were named after Abraham, the patriarch revered by Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, a powerful symbol of a shared heritage that transcends political divides. This deliberate choice of name underscored the core philosophy of the agreements, to focus on common ground and the potential for a shared future. The agreements unlocked a wave of collaboration in sectors ranging from technology and tourism to healthcare and security. Direct flights were established, embassies were opened, and joint ventures were launched, weaving a new fabric of interdependence in a region long characterized by separation. This was diplomacy in its most creative form, redrawing the map of possibilities. The long-term impact of the Abraham Accords is still unfolding, but they have undeniably altered the strategic calculus of the Middle East. They demonstrate that historical conflicts need not be a permanent barrier to progress, and that pragmatic cooperation can forge new pathways to stability. By creating new alliances and economic partnerships, the Accords have introduced a new dynamic, challenging old assumptions and encouraging other nations to reconsider their own diplomatic postures. It serves as a powerful reminder that even in the most arid and conflicted landscapes, the seeds of peace, when carefully nurtured, can find a way to bloom, changing the ecosystem for all. We have journeyed through centuries of human endeavor, witnessing moments when the stroke of a pen has proven mightier than the sword. From the fields of Westphalia, where the modern nation-state was born, to the halls of Paris, where the world united against a common climate threat, these treaties are the great punctuation marks of our shared history. They are the artifacts of our attempts to bring order out of chaos, to build bridges across chasms of conflict, and to codify our highest aspirations for a better world. These agreements have reshaped not just politics, but our very future. They are testaments to our species' remarkable capacity for cooperation, even in the face of profound disagreement. Each accord, from Versailles to the Abraham Accords, is a complex tapestry woven from threads of compromise, ambition, foresight, and often painful lessons learned from past failures. They are rarely perfect instruments, and their legacies are often debated for generations, yet they stand as monuments to the enduring power of dialogue and the relentless pursuit of common ground. They remind us that diplomacy, though imperfect, can be history's greatest tool. The story of these treaties is our story. It is the ongoing narrative of how we, as a global community, navigate our differences and strive to build a more peaceful and prosperous planet for all who inhabit it. The challenges ahead are immense, but the lessons from these pivotal moments in history offer a guide and a glimmer of hope. The future will be written by the agreements we make today, by the courage we show in choosing understanding over conflict. If you enjoyed this journey through geopolitics and history, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. This continuous dialogue is what shapes our world, and your voice is a vital part of it. The impact of these agreements is felt in all our lives, whether we realize it or not. So we ask you, which agreement do you think had the biggest impact? Which pact most profoundly altered the course of human events, for better or for worse? Let us know in the comments below. Your perspective enriches this vital conversation. Stay curious, stay wise. This is Curious Sagacity.